It was never about love, was it?
The champagne flute in my hand felt like a weapon I wasn't allowed to use. Standing in the marble-floored penthouse overlooking Elliott Bay, I watched Seattle's elite mingle around my daughter Julia like vultures circling fresh meat. The irony wasn't lost on me. A washed-up ex-cop turned private investigator surrounded by the kind of people who'd cross the street to avoid me on any other day. Rick Lawson, as I live and breathe. The voice behind me dripped with manufactured charm. I turned to face Craig DeWitt, my ex-wife Melissa's third husband, all 5'8" of him stuffed into a $1,000 suit that couldn't hide his beer gut. His thinning hair was slicked back with enough gel to waterproof a boat. Craig. I kept my voice neutral, though my jaw clenched involuntarily. Nice party. Must have cost you a fortune. He laughed, the sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. Money's no object when it comes to Julia's happiness. Of course, you wouldn't understand that concept, would you? Before I could respond, Melissa appeared at Craig's side like a perfectly groomed shark. At 40, she'd had enough work done to look 35 in dim lighting. Her dress probably cost more than I made in 3 months. Rick, she said, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. I'm surprised you made it. I wasn't sure you'd received the invitation. Hard to miss when it's delivered by process server, I replied. Though I appreciate the formal touch. Craig's hand found the small of Melissa's back, a gesture so possessive it made my teeth ache. We thought it was important for Julia to have both her fathers here tonight. Both her fathers. The words hit like a slap. I'd been the one walking the floor with her at 3 a.m. when she had colic. I'd taught her to ride a bike, helped with homework, scared away teenage boys who thought they were man enough for my little girl. But Craig had the money, the connections, the penthouse overlooking the Sound. Where is Julia? I asked, scanning the crowd of designer dresses and Rolex watches. She's mingling with Brandon's family, Melissa said. The Ashfords are very prominent in the financial district. Brandon's father owns 3 investment firms. Of course he did. I spotted Julia across the room, radiant in a silver dress that made her look older than her 22 years. She was laughing at something a distinguished older man was saying, her engagement ring catching the light like a disco ball. The ring probably cost more than my car. She looks happy, I said, meaning it. She is, Craig said. Finally has the stability she deserves, the kind of future you never could have given her. I felt my hands curl into fists at my sides. Craig noticed and smiled wider. Now, Rick, this is a celebration. No need for any of that detective drama you're so fond of. I'm a private investigator, I corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Craig's laugh was uglier this time. From what I hear, you spend most of your time following cheating spouses and serving divorce papers. Real dignified work. The crowd around us had grown quiet, sensing the tension. I could feel eyes on us, wealthy socialites getting their entertainment from watching the poor relation get put in his place. At least I work for a living, I said quietly. Craig's face flushed. I'll have you know I manage over $50 million in client investments. Other people's money doesn't count, Craig. Enough. Melissa stepped between us, her voice low and dangerous. Rick, perhaps it's time you paid your respects to Julia and left. This is her night. I looked past them to where my daughter stood, still surrounded by the Ashford family. She caught my eye and waved, her smile genuine and warm. For a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to wait by the window for me to come home from my beat. You're right, I said. This is her night. I made my way across the room, nodding to familiar faces from Melissa's social circle. They nodded back with the kind of polite discomfort reserved for unwanted relatives at weddings. I'd arrested half their husbands at one point or another, back when I wore a badge. Daddy! Julia threw her arms around me, and for a moment, the penthouse full of pretentious assholes disappeared. She smelled like the vanilla perfume she'd worn since high school, mixed with champagne and happiness. Hey, sweetheart, you look beautiful. Thank you, she pulled back, her eyes bright. I'm so glad you're here. I wasn't sure. She glanced toward Craig and Melissa, then back to me. Well, I'm just glad. Me too. I squeezed her hand. So where's this fiancé of yours? I haven't had a chance to meet him properly. Her smile flickered for just a second. He's around somewhere, probably talking business with his father. She lowered her voice. They do that a lot. Before I could ask what she meant, a young man appeared at her side. Brandon Ashford was everything I'd expected. Tall, blonde, with the kind of confident smile that came from never having to worry about money. His handshake was firm, but soft, the hands of someone who'd never done manual labor. "Mr. Lawson," he said, "I've heard so much about you." "All good things, I hope." His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course." We made small talk for a few minutes, the kind of polite conversation that revealed nothing and meant less. Brandon kept checking his phone, and I noticed Julia watching him with a worried expression. "Excuse me," he said finally, "I need to take this call." He walked away without waiting for a response, leaving Julia looking embarrassed. "He's under a lot of pressure with the wedding planning," she said quickly, "and his father's been pushing him to take on more responsibility at the firm." "Uh-huh." I watched Brandon disappear into Craig's study with two other men I didn't recognize. "Julia, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you happy? Really happy?" She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it. For a moment, she looked uncertain, younger than her years. Then the moment passed, and her bright smile returned. "I'm getting married, Daddy. Of course I'm happy." But she wouldn't meet my eyes when she said it. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced conversations and passive-aggressive comments. I nursed my champagne and watched the crowd, my detective instincts kicking in despite myself. There were undercurrents here, tensions beneath the polite surface that set my teeth on edge. I noticed Craig's assistant, a brunette named Tara, who looked like she'd stepped off a magazine cover, whispering urgently with a large man in an ill-fitting suit. The man had the look of hired muscle, all shoulders and suspicious eyes. When he caught me watching, he stared back with the kind of professional assessment that made my hand drift toward where my service weapon used to sit. As the evening wound down, I made my way toward the exit, stopping to say goodbye to Julia. She was surrounded by well-wishers, but she broke away when she saw me approaching. "Leaving so soon?" she asked. "It's getting late, and I have work tomorrow." I kissed her forehead. "Thank you for inviting me, sweetheart. It means everything." "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, kid. More than you know." I was almost to the door when Craig appeared, blocking my path like a bouncer at a nightclub. "Leaving us so soon, Rick?" "Party's winding down. Time for the working class to head home." His smile was razor sharp. "Before you go, I wanted to have a word with you, privately." He gestured toward his study, the same room where Brandon had disappeared earlier. I followed him in, noting the expensive leather furniture and the wall of law books that probably hadn't been opened since they were purchased by the yard. Craig closed the door behind us and turned to face me, his friendly mask finally slipping. "Let's cut the BS, Rick. We both know why you're really here. Enlighten me. Julia's trust fund, the one her grandmother left her, it becomes accessible when she gets married." I kept my expression neutral. "What about it?" $2.7 million. That's a lot of money for a girl who's never had to work for anything. "She's a smart kid. She'll figure it out." Craig laughed. "Will she? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like she's about to marry a boy who's got some very expensive habits. Gambling, specifically." My blood went cold. "What are you talking about?" "Brandon's in deep with some very unpleasant people, the kind who break legs when they don't get paid. His father's been covering for him, but there's only so much even a wealthy man can do." "And you think he's marrying Julia for her money?" "I don't think anything, I know it. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" I studied his face, looking for the angle. With Craig, there was always an angle. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because despite what you might think, I care about Julia. She's been good to me, and I don't want to see her hurt." "How noble of you." His mask slipped a little further. "There's another reason. I don't like you, Rick. I never have. You walk around with this holier-than-thou attitude, like you're better than the rest of us because you used to carry a badge. But you're just another failure who couldn't hold on to his family. Is there a point to this character assassination? The point is, I want you gone, out of Julia's life, out of Melissa's life, out of our lives completely. And I think Brandon's little problem might be just the excuse we need." I felt the pieces clicking into place. "You're going to frame me for something." "Frame you?" "Rick, you're a private investigator with a history of violence and a drinking problem. When Brandon's gambling debts catch up with him and something unfortunate happens, who do you think the police are going to look at first? The loving stepfather who's been nothing but supportive, or the bitter ex-cop with a grudge?" "You son of a witch. Now, no need for name-calling. I'm simply pointing out the reality of the situation. Julia doesn't need you anymore, Rick. None of us do. It's time you accepted that and moved on." I wanted to punch him. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to wipe that smug smile off his face with my fist, but I knew that's exactly what he wanted. One attack charge and I'd be out of Julia's life forever. Instead, I smiled. You know what, Craig? You're absolutely right. His smile faltered. He'd been expecting anger, threats, maybe even violence. He wasn't prepared for agreement. I am? Absolutely. Julia's a grown woman. She can make her own choices, her own mistakes. And if she wants to marry a gambling dependent who's after her money, that's her business. Yes, exactly. But here's the thing about being a private investigator, Craig. You learn to see patterns. And the pattern I'm seeing here is a man who's very eager to get rid of the one person who might ask uncomfortable questions. His face went pale. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm stating a fact. You want me gone because you know I'll figure out whatever game you're really playing here. The question is, what are you really after? Because I don't think this is about protecting Julia at all. You're paranoid. Maybe, but I'm also very good at my job. I moved toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Oh, and Craig, if anything happens to my daughter, anything at all, I will burn your entire world to the ground. That's not a threat. It's a promise. I left him standing there, his face white with rage and something that might have been fear. The next morning hit me like a hangover without the fun of getting drunk first. I sat in my cramped office above a Chinese restaurant in the International District, staring at the stack of bills on my desk and trying to shake the feeling that I'd walked into a trap the night before. My partner, Chloe Martinez, knocked on the door frame before entering. She was 35, sharp as a razor, and the best investigator I'd ever worked with. She'd left the FBI after a case went sideways, and we'd been partners for 3 years. You look like hell, she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. Feel worse. Coffee? Please. She accepted the mug I poured from the ancient coffee maker that had come with the office. So how was the society party? About as fun as a root canal. I filled her in on the conversation with Craig, watching her expression grow more serious as I talked. So let me get this straight, she said when I finished. Your ex-wife's husband claims your daughter's fiancé is a gambling dependent, then threatens to frame you for something, all while insisting he's trying to protect Julia? That's the gist of it. And your gut says? My gut says Craig's the one we should be worried about, not Brandon. But I need proof. Chloe leaned back in her chair, thinking. What do you know about Craig's business? He calls himself an investment advisor, has an office downtown, drives a Porsche, lives in a penthouse. Beyond that, not much. Want me to run a background check? Already started one this morning. I pulled up the file on my computer. Craig DeWitt, 38, originally from Portland. Moved to Seattle 5 years ago. Right around the time he met Melissa. No criminal record, good credit, member of the country club. Too clean? That's what I'm thinking. Guy appears out of nowhere with enough money to impress my ex-wife, and she's not easily impressed when it comes to bank accounts. My phone buzzed. Text message from Julia. Can we have lunch today? Need to talk? I showed the message to Chloe. She raised an eyebrow. Trouble in paradise? Only one way to find out. I met Julia at a small cafe in Capitol Hill, far from the financial district where she might run into Brandon or his family. She looked tired, older than she had the night before. The engagement ring caught the afternoon light, but she kept twisting it around her finger like it didn't quite fit. Thanks for meeting me, Dad. Of course. What's on your mind? She stirred her coffee without drinking it, gathering her thoughts. Last night, after you left, Brandon and I had a fight. About what? About you, actually. He said some things. She trailed off, then looked up at me with eyes that reminded me of her mother's. The good version of her mother, from before the divorce got ugly. What kind of things? He said you were trouble, that you'd been asking questions about his family, digging into their business. He was really angry, Dad. I've never seen him like that. Interesting. I hadn't asked any questions about the Ashfords yet, but Brandon was already defensive. What did you tell him? That you're my father and you care about me, but he said, she hesitated. He said if you didn't back off, there might be consequences. What kind of consequences? He wouldn't say, but Craig was there and they were talking like they'd discussed it before. The pieces were starting to form a picture I didn't like. Julia, can I ask you something personal? Sure. Are you happy with Brandon? Really happy? She was quiet for a long moment. I thought I was. He's charming, successful, everything I thought I wanted. But lately, he's been different. Stressed about money, angry about things that don't seem important. And he's been spending a lot of time with Craig. What do you mean? They have these private conversations. Business stuff, Brandon says, but it feels like more than that. Like they're planning something. My detective instincts were screaming now. Julia, I want you to be careful around both of them. If you feel unsafe at any point, Dad, you're scaring me. Good. Maybe you should be scared. That evening, I sat in my car outside Craig's office building, watching the late workers file out into the Seattle drizzle. His Porsche was still in the parking garage, so I knew he was still inside. At 8:30, he finally appeared, but he wasn't alone. Brandon was with him, along with the muscle I'd seen at the party. They drove to a bar in Belltown, the kind of place where the drinks cost $20, and the clientele wore suits that cost more than most people's cars. I followed at a distance, parking across the street where I could watch the entrance. Through the window, I could see them at a corner table, heads close together in intense conversation. The muscle, I'd learned his name was Vince from a quick record search, sat with his back to the wall, eyes constantly scanning the room. I was considering my options when my phone rang. Chloe. I've got something on your boy Craig, she said without preamble. I'm listening. His investment firm is registered, but barely. 3 employees total, including him. But here's the interesting part. He's been moving a lot of money around in the past 6 months. Transfers to offshore accounts, shell companies, the works. How much money? Hard to say exactly, but we're talking millions. And Rick? Some of those shell companies are registered to Brandon Ashford. The picture was getting clearer and uglier by the minute. They're working together. Looks like it, but working together on what? I watched Craig lean back in his chair, laughing at something Brandon had said. I think I know. Julia's trust fund. They're planning to steal it. How? Simple. Brandon marries Julia, gets access to her money, then he and Craig make it disappear through their shell companies. By the time anyone figures out what happened, the money's gone and so are they. What about Julia? I thought about my daughter's face that afternoon, the worry and confusion in her eyes. I don't think they plan to keep her around long after the wedding. The next morning, I was at my desk early, trying to figure out my next move, when my office door exploded inward. Vince filled the doorway like a mountain of bad intentions. His suit stretched tight across shoulders that belonged in a gym, not a boardroom. Mr. Lawson, he said, his voice like gravel in a cement mixer. Mr. DeWitt would like a word. Tell Mr. DeWitt to make an appointment. Vince smiled, revealing teeth that had seen better decades. He's waiting downstairs, suggests you don't keep him waiting. I could see the bulge of a shoulder holster under his jacket. Not that I was particularly intimidated. I dealt with bigger and badder during my cop days. But I was curious about what Craig wanted badly enough to send his pet gorilla to collect me. Lead the way. Craig was sitting in the back of a black Lincoln Town car, looking like a mob boss from a bad movie. He gestured for me to get in. Rick, thanks for joining me. Didn't realize I had a choice. You always have choices. The question is whether you make smart ones or stupid ones. Vince got in the front seat and the driver pulled into traffic. I noticed we were heading toward the waterfront. Where are we going? Nowhere special. Just thought we should have a private conversation, away from prying eyes and recording devices. I'm not wearing a wire if that's what you're worried about. Of course not. But you are a private investigator, and private investigators have a tendency to document things. I prefer conversations that stay conversational. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the city sliding past the tinted windows. Finally, Craig spoke again. I hear you've been asking questions about my business. It's what I do. Yes, but in this case, it's what you need to stop doing. Or what? Craig smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You know, Rick, Seattle can be a dangerous city. A lot of crime, especially in the neighborhoods where private investigators tend to work. Would be a shame if something happened to you. Are you threatening me, Craig? I'm stating facts. Men in your line of work face occupational hazards. Sometimes those hazards catch up with them. The car had stopped at a pier overlooking Elliott Bay. Through the windshield, I could see the dark water lapping against the pilings. Very atmospheric, very intimidating, very amateur. Let me tell you a fact, Craig. I've been threatened by better men than you, and they're all either dead or in prison. You want to play games? That's fine. But understand that I'm very good at games. His smile faded. This isn't a game, Rick. This is about family. Julia's family. and you're not part of it anymore. Julia might disagree with that. Julia's young. She'll get over it, especially when she has Brandon to comfort her. About Brandon, I said. Interesting business partners you've chosen. Tell me, was the gambling debt story supposed to throw me off the scent? Or are you really that unimaginative? Craig's face went white, then red. I don't know what you think you know. I know you're planning to steal my daughter's trust fund. I know Brandon's in on it. And I know you're both too stupid to pull it off without getting caught. You can't prove anything. Yet. The word hung in the air between us like a blade. Craig stared at me for a long moment, then nodded to Vince. Take him back to his office. That's it? I asked. No cement shoes, no swimming lessons? I'm disappointed, Craig. I expected more from a criminal mastermind. This is your last warning, Rick. Stay away from Julia. Stay away from Brandon. Stay away from my business. Or the next conversation we have will be very different. Looking forward to it? The next few days passed in a tense quiet that reminded me of the moments before a thunderstorm. I kept digging into Craig's business, following paper trails and financial records that led nowhere and everywhere at once. Chloe worked her contacts at the FBI, trying to get more information on the offshore accounts. Meanwhile, Julia called every day, her voice getting more strained each time we talked. Brandon had become increasingly controlling, she said, questioning her about our conversations and insisting she cut contact with me entirely. He says you're trying to ruin our relationship, she told me during one call, that you can't stand to see me happy. What do you think? There was a long pause. I think I don't know what to think anymore. That's when I decided it was time to stop being subtle. I'd kept in touch with a few guys from my police days, and one of them owed me a favor. Detective Sergeant Mike Duvall had been my partner for 2 years before I made detective. He was honest, thorough, and had a healthy skepticism about rich people who live too well on other people's money. You want me to do what? He asked when I laid out my request. Just a welfare check. Julia Lawson, soon to be Julia Ashford, I'm concerned about her safety. Based on what? Based on the fact that her fiancé is involved in a financial scam with my ex-wife's husband, and they've both made it clear they want me out of the picture permanently. Mike leaned back in his chair, studying me with cop eyes. You got proof of this scam? Working on it? Then work faster. I can't get a warrant based on your gut feelings, Rick, no matter how good they used to be. I'm not asking for a warrant. I'm asking you to knock on a door and make sure my daughter is okay. And if she is, then I'll know she's okay. And if she isn't, then you'll have probable cause for that warrant. Mike was quiet for a moment, thinking it over. You know, if you're wrong about this, it's going to look like maltreatment. Rich people have lawyers, Rick. Good ones. I know. And if you're right, and these guys are as dangerous as you think, a welfare check might just escalate things. I know that too, he sighed. What's the address? 2 hours later, Mike called me back. Your daughter's fine, Rick. Shaken up, but fine. Shaken up how? Seems her fiancé didn't appreciate the police showing up at his door, got belligerent, started making threats, had to calm him down. What kind of threats? The usual rich boy stuff, lawyers, lawsuits, calling the mayor. But here's the interesting part. While I was there, I noticed some things. What kind of things? The kind of things that make a cop curious. Expensive electronics, more cash than most people keep lying around, and a very nervous young man who kept checking his phone every 30 seconds. Nervous how? Like he was expecting bad news or bad people. I felt a chill run down my spine. Mike, I think Julia might be in real danger. Based on what? A nervous fiancé and some expensive toys? Based on the fact that Craig DeWitt had me picked up by his muscle yesterday and driven to the waterfront for a friendly chat about staying out of his business. There was a long pause. Why didn't you mention that before? Because I was hoping I could handle it without involving the department. But I think this thing is bigger than I thought. How much bigger? I told him about the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the trust fund. When I finished, Mike was quiet for a long time. You know what this sounds like, Rick? Money laundering? Money laundering. Which means we might not be talking about a simple theft here. We might be talking about organized crime. The pieces clicked into place with an almost audible snap. Craig wasn't just stealing Julia's trust fund. He was using it to clean dirty money. And Brandon wasn't just a gambling dependent. He was a front man, a respectable face for a very unrespectable business. Mike, I need that warrant. I'll see what I can do, but Rick, be careful. If these guys are connected to organized crime, they won't hesitate to eliminate problems. Permanently. That evening, I was sitting in my apartment, nursing a beer and trying to figure out my next move, when someone knocked on my door. It was Julia, and she looked terrible. Her eyes were red from crying, and there was a bruise on her left wrist that she was trying to hide under her sleeve. Jesus, Julia, what happened? Can I come in, please? I stepped aside, and she collapsed onto my couch like a puppet with cut strings. Brandon and I had another fight, she said. A bad one. About what? About you. About the police showing up today. He was furious, Dad. He said you were trying to destroy his life, and that if you didn't stop, he was going to make sure you regretted it. Did he hurt you? She pulled her sleeve down further. It was an accident. He was just angry. Julia, look at me. I sat down beside her, keeping my voice gentle. Men who love you don't hurt you, even when they're angry, especially when they're angry. He said he was sorry. I'm sure he did. They always do. She started crying then, deep sobs that shook her whole body. I held her like I had when she was little and had nightmares, feeling helpless and furious in equal measure. I don't know what to do, she whispered. I love him, but I'm scared of him. And Craig keeps telling me that you're the problem, that everything was fine until you started interfering. Julia, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Brandon and Craig are involved in something illegal, something dangerous, and I think they're planning to use your trust fund to do it. She pulled back, staring at me with wide eyes. What are you talking about? I told her everything, the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the threats. When I finished, she was pale but no longer crying. You're sure about this? I'm sure. The question is, what are you going to do about it? She was quiet for a long time, thinking. Finally, she looked up at me with an expression I recognized from her childhood, the same look she'd had when she decided to stand up to the playground bully who'd been picking on her best friend. I want to help, she said. Tell me what to do. First, you're going to stay here tonight. Tomorrow, we're going to the police together, and you're going to tell them everything you know about Brandon's business dealings with Craig. What if they don't believe us? They'll believe us. I've got friends on the force, and we've got evidence. Not enough to convict, maybe, but enough to get their attention. And then we let the professionals handle it. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't going to be that simple. Craig and Brandon had too much invested in their scheme to just walk away, and men like that didn't give up without a fight. I was proven right the next morning. Julia and I were getting ready to leave for the police station when my phone rang. It was Chloe, and she sounded scared. Rick, you need to get down here right now. What's wrong? Someone trashed the office. I mean, really trashed it. Computers destroyed, files scattered, the works. And Rick? There's a message spray-painted on the wall. What does it say? Last warning. I looked at Julia, who had gone pale again. Change of plans, I told her. We're going to the police station right now. But when we got there, Mike Duvall had news that changed everything. Craig DeWitt's gone, he said. Disappeared sometime last night. His office is cleaned out, his accounts are empty, and his penthouse is up for sale. What about Brandon? Also gone. Left a note for Julia saying the wedding was off and he was sorry. Julia sank into a chair, looking stunned. They just left? Looks like it. Took the money and ran. I felt a rage building in my chest that threatened to consume everything in its path. How much did they get? Hard to say exactly, but preliminary estimates suggest somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 million. Julia's trust fund, plus money from several other investors. Other investors? Turns out your boy Craig was running a classic Ponzi scheme. Julia's money was just the latest infusion of cash he needed to keep the whole thing from collapsing. Julia looked up at me with tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry, Dad. You tried to warn me, and I didn't listen. This isn't your fault, sweetheart. These guys are professionals. They've probably done this before. Mike cleared his throat. Actually, about that, we ran Craig's prints through the system, and guess what? Craig DeWitt doesn't exist. The real Craig DeWitt died in a car accident in Portland 6 years ago. Your boy stole his identity. So who is he really? Still working on that. But whoever he is, he's good at this. Very good. I stood up, pacing to the window. Outside, Seattle continued its daily routine, oblivious to the fact that my daughter's life had just been destroyed by a man who didn't even exist. There has to be something we can do, I said. Some way to track them down. We're trying, Rick. But these guys had a head start and a lot of money. They could be anywhere by now. That's when Julia spoke up, her voice quiet but determined. Maybe not anywhere. We both turned to look at her. Brandon mentioned something once when he'd been drinking. He said Craig had a place in the Cayman Islands, a backup plan, he called it. Mike and I exchanged glances. You think they went there? I think it's possible. Brandon said Craig was paranoid about having an escape route, somewhere he could disappear if things went bad. Mike was already reaching for his phone. I'll contact the FBI. If they crossed international borders with stolen money, it becomes a federal case. But I was thinking about something else, something that had been nagging at me since this whole thing started. Julia, I said, when did Brandon first mention this place in the Caymans? She thought for a moment. A few months ago. Why? Because if Craig's been planning this for months, then everything that happened, the engagement, the party, even the threats, it was all part of the plan. What do you mean? I mean, they wanted me involved. They wanted me to investigate, to cause trouble, to give them an excuse to disappear. I played right into their hands. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on protecting Julia that I'd never considered the possibility that my investigation was exactly what Craig and Brandon wanted. They'd used my love for my daughter against me, turning me into an unwitting accomplice in their escape. But if that was true, then they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated how far a father would go to protect his child. 3 days later, I was on a plane to Grand Cayman, armed with a tourist visa and a burning need for justice that threatened to consume everything in its path. The FBI was pursuing all available leads, which was government speak for don't hold your breath. But I had advantages they didn't. I knew Craig's psychology, I understood his arrogance, and I was willing to operate outside the boundaries of federal law enforcement. Chloe had wanted to come with me, but someone needed to stay behind and coordinate with the authorities. More importantly, someone needed to keep an eye on Julia, who was staying at my apartment and trying to piece her life back together. You sure about this? Chloe had asked me at the airport. No, but I'm doing it anyway. What if you find them? Then they're going to wish they'd stayed in Seattle. Grand Cayman was everything I'd expected. Crystal blue water, white sand beaches, and enough offshore banks to launder the GDP of a small country. It was also hot, humid, and crawling with wealthy tourists who looked exactly like the kind of people Craig would blend in with. I'd booked a room at a mid-range hotel and spent my first day getting oriented. The island wasn't that big, but it had enough high-end resorts and private communities to hide two men with stolen millions. I needed a strategy that didn't involve knocking on every door in the Cayman Islands. That's when I remembered something Julia had mentioned. Brandon's drinking. Rich boys with guilty consciences and too much money tended to gravitate toward expensive bars where they could drink top-shelf liquor and pretend their problems didn't exist. I started with the hotel bars at the most exclusive resorts, nursing expensive drinks and keeping my eyes open. On my second night, I hit pay dirt at a place called the Reef Club, an upscale bar attached to a resort that catered to the kind of people who considered $1,000 a night room rate reasonable. Brandon was sitting at the far end of the bar, drunk and talking loudly to anyone who would listen. He looked like hell, unshaven, rumpled clothes, the kind of desperate edge that came from too much alcohol and too little sleep. I ordered a drink and settled in to listen. Whole thing was supposed to be simple, he was saying to the bartender, who was nodding with the practiced patience of someone paid to listen to rich people's problems. Get married, access the trust fund, transfer the money, clean and easy. But it didn't work out that way, the bartender asked. Her father, goddamn private investigator, wouldn't leave it alone, kept digging, asking questions, making Craig nervous. Brandon took another gulp of his whiskey. Craig said we had to move up the timeline, get out before the cops figured out what was happening. And now? Now we're stuck here while Craig figures out the next move. But I'm starting to think there is no next move. I think we're screwed. I'd heard enough. I paid for my drink and followed Brandon when he stumbled out of the bar 20 minutes later. He was staying at the resort, which made sense. If you're going to hide, might as well do it in comfort. I watched him weave his way to the elevators, noting his room number when he got off on the 7th floor. Then I went back to my hotel to plan my next move. The next morning, I was waiting in the lobby when Brandon came down for breakfast. He looked marginally better, showered and shaved, wearing clean clothes, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He kept checking his phone and looking over his shoulder like he expected trouble to walk through the door at any moment. He wasn't wrong. I followed him to a small cafe near the beach where he ordered coffee and eggs he didn't eat. After 20 minutes of pushing food around his plate, he made a phone call. "It's me," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet morning air. "We need to talk. I can't do this anymore." I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but I could see Brandon's face growing paler with each passing second. "I don't care what you said before," he continued. "This is over. I want my share of the money, and then I'm done." More silence, then Brandon's face went white. "You can't be serious," he whispered. "We had a deal." The call ended, and Brandon sat staring at his phone for a long moment. Then he threw some money on the table and walked quickly toward the beach. I followed at a distance, watching as he made his way to a secluded stretch of sand. A few minutes later, a black SUV pulled up and Craig got out. Even from 100 yards away, I could see the tension between them. Craig was gesticulating angrily while Brandon stood with his arms crossed, shaking his head. Their voices were getting louder, but I couldn't make out the words over the sound of the waves. Then Craig pulled out a tool. It wasn't a big tool, looked like a .38 snub nose, but it was definitely pointed at Brandon's chest. Brandon raised his hands, backing away slowly. They talked for another minute. Then Craig gestured toward the SUV. Brandon reluctantly got in the passenger seat, and they drove away. I ran back to the cafe and grabbed a taxi, following the SUV as it wound through the island's narrow roads. We ended up at a private marina on the north side of the island, where Craig and Brandon boarded a sleek white yacht that probably cost more than most people's houses. "You want me to wait?" the taxi driver asked. "No, thanks." I watched the yacht pull away from the dock, heading out into the Caribbean. Without a boat of my own, there was nothing I could do but watch them disappear into the blue horizon. But I learned something important. Craig and Brandon were having problems, and problems meant opportunities. I spent the rest of the day asking questions around the marina, posing as a tourist interested in charter fishing. Most people were helpful, but unhelpful, if that made sense. Yes, they'd seen the yacht. No, they didn't know who owned it. Yes, it came and went regularly. No, they didn't know where it went. But one old-timer who ran a bait shop was more observant than the others. "That boat belongs to a fellow calls himself Charles Davidson," he told me. "Been coming here for about 6 months, always with different young men. Pays cash, minds his own business, tips well." Charles Davidson, CD, Craig DeWitt. Not very imaginative, but then again, criminals rarely were. "You know where he's staying? Big house up on 7 Mile Beach. Rented it for a year, paid in advance. Must be doing well for himself." "What kind of business is he in?" The old man shrugged. "Says he's in investments. But between you and me, I've seen his type before. Money that comes too easy and leaves too fast, if you know what I mean." I knew exactly what he meant. That evening, I drove to 7 Mile Beach and found the house. It was exactly what I'd expected. A sprawling modern mansion with floor-to-ceiling windows, infinity pool, and enough security cameras to film a movie. The yacht was tied up at a private dock, which meant Craig and Brandon were home. I parked down the beach and settled in to watch, trying to figure out the best way to approach the situation. I could call the local police, but I had no idea how much influence Craig's money might have bought him. I could call the FBI, but by the time they got here, Craig and Brandon could be gone again. Or I could handle it myself. As I was weighing my options, I saw movement on the yacht. Brandon appeared on deck, looking around nervously before climbing onto the dock. He walked quickly toward the house, but instead of going inside, he headed for the beach. He was running. I got out of my car and intercepted him before he'd gone 50 yards. "Brandon." He spun around, his face a mask of terror. When he saw me, the terror turned to something like relief. "Jesus Christ," he gasped. "Rick, how did you—" "Never mind. You have to help me." "Help you? You stole my daughter's money and broke her heart. Why the hell would I help you?" "Because Craig's lost his mind. He's talking about eliminating me, making it look like an accident. He says I'm a liability now that the police are involved." "And you believed him?" "I saw what he did to his last partner." That stopped me cold. "What do you mean?" "The real Craig DeWitt, the guy whose identity he stole, that wasn't a car accident. Craig eliminated him, made it look accidental. He told me about it one night when he was drunk, like it was funny. I felt my blood turn to ice. If Craig was willing to eliminate to protect his identity, he wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatened his freedom, including Julia." "Where's the money?" I asked. "Offshore accounts. Craig's got all the access codes. I can't touch it without him. Then we need to get those codes." Brandon laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "You want to go up against Craig? He's got tools, security systems, and a boat that can outrun anything the Coast Guard has. Plus, he's completely insane." I've dealt with insane before. Not like this. This guy's a stone-cold butcher, Rick. He's already planning his next score, talking about some widow in Miami with a trust fund worth $20 million. Another innocent sufferer. Another family destroyed. The rage that had been building in my chest since this whole thing started finally boiled over. Here's what's going to happen, I told Brandon. You're going to help me get those access codes. In exchange, I'll make sure you live long enough to testify against Craig and maybe, avoid a homicide charge. And if I refuse, then I'll leave you here on the beach for Craig to find. Your choice. Brandon stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. What do you need me to do? Tell me everything about the house, security, weapons, Craig's routine, everything. For the next hour, Brandon laid out the details of Craig's operation. The house had a sophisticated alarm system, but Brandon knew the codes. Craig kept a tool in his bedroom and another in his office, but he was overconfident and careless. Most importantly, he kept all the financial information on a laptop in his office, safe. The safe combination? I asked. Julia's birthday. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. Craig had used my daughter's birthday as the combination to the safe where he kept the evidence of stealing her money. One more thing, Brandon said. Craig's expecting someone tonight, a business associate from Miami. If they're meeting about the widow, this might be your only chance to get them both. What time? Midnight? I checked my watch. It was almost 11. Then we better get moving. The house was dark except for lights in Craig's office, which faced the ocean. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see him pacing back and forth, talking on the phone. He looked agitated, gesturing angrily at someone I couldn't see. Brandon and I had approached from the beach, avoiding the security cameras that covered the front of the property. The alarm system was sophisticated but not foolproof. Brandon's access code still worked, which told me Craig was either overconfident or sloppy. Probably both. He's in there, Brandon whispered, pointing toward the office. Safe's behind the painting of the sailboat. Where are the tools? Office desk, top drawer, bedroom nightstand. There might be others. I checked my watch. 11:45. His visitor should be here soon. When they arrive, I want you to create a distraction. Something that will get them both away from the office. What kind of distraction? I don't care. Set something on fire if you have to. Just give me 5 minutes alone with that safe. Brandon nodded, though he looked like he might throw up. Rick, if this goes wrong, it won't. But if it does, then make sure Julia knows I tried. At exactly midnight, a black sedan pulled into the driveway. A woman got out, tall, elegant, probably 50, with the kind of understated wealth that came from old money. She walked to the front door like she owned the place. Craig met her at the entrance, all smiles and charm. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language suggested this was a business meeting, not a social call. They moved to the living room, which was on the opposite side of the house from the office. Perfect. Now, I whispered to Brandon. He disappeared into the house while I waited by the office windows. A few minutes later, I heard a smoke alarm going off, followed by raised voices. Craig and his visitor appeared in the hallway, moving quickly toward what I assumed was the kitchen. I slipped through the unlocked office door and went straight to the painting. Behind it was a wall safe, just as Brandon had described. I punched in Julia's birthday, month, day, year, and the safe clicked open. Inside was a laptop, several flash drives, and a stack of documents. I grabbed everything, stuffing it all into a backpack I'd brought for the purpose. I was almost finished when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Craig appeared in the doorway, and for a moment we just stared at each other. Then his face twisted with rage. "You son of a witch!" He lunged for the desk drawer, but I was faster. I tackled him before he could reach the tool, and we went down hard, crashing into a glass coffee table that exploded into 1,000 pieces. Craig was bigger than I'd expected, and stronger. He fought like a man with nothing to lose, throwing wild punches and trying to claw at my eyes. But I'd been in more fights than he had, and I knew how to end them quickly. I got him in a chokehold and squeezed until he went limp. He wasn't dead. I could feel his pulse, but he'd be unconscious for a while. I was zip-tying his hands behind his back when the woman appeared in the doorway. She took one look at the scene and reached into her purse, pulling out a small automatic pistol. "Step away from him," she said calmly. "Lady, you don't want to get involved in this." "I'm already involved. Charles owes me a great deal of money." Charles, Craig's alias. "Let me guess. You're the widow from Miami." Her smile was cold as winter. Widow, yes. Sufferer, no. Charles and I have been partners for 3 years. This was supposed to be our biggest score yet. The pieces clicked into place. Craig wasn't just a con man. He was part of a larger operation, a network of criminals who specialized in targeting wealthy sufferers. How many people have you eliminated? I asked. Fewer than you might think. More than you'd hope. She gestured with the tool. Now step away from my partner. I don't think so. I will shoot you. Probably. But you'll have to explain a dead body to the local police, and that's going to complicate your exit strategy. She considered this for a moment. You make a fair point, but I can wound you badly enough to keep you from interfering. You could try. That's when Brandon appeared behind her, holding a fire extinguisher. He brought it down on her head with a wet thunk, and she collapsed like a marionette with cut strings. Jesus, he gasped, staring down at her unconscious form. Is she dead? I checked her pulse. No, but she's going to have a hell of a headache. I zip-tied her hands and feet, then turned my attention back to Craig, who was starting to stir. His eyes opened, and when he saw me, he smiled. Rick damn Lawson, he said, I should have eliminated you in Seattle. Yeah, you should have, but you got greedy. Greedy? He laughed. You think this is about greed? This is about power, about taking what I want from people who don't deserve it. People like Julia? His smile widened. Sweet little Julia, so trusting, so naive. Did you know she actually thought Brandon loved her? Right up until the end, she believed in true love and happy endings. I felt my hands curl into fists. You destroyed her life for money. I destroyed her life because I could. Because people like her, people like you, think the world owes them something. Well, guess what? The world doesn't owe you crap. You're right, I said, it doesn't. Then I punched him in the face as hard as I could. His head snapped back, blood streaming from his broken nose. He spat out a tooth and glared at me with pure hatred. Feel better? He asked. Getting there. I opened the laptop and started going through the files. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Dozens of sufferers, millions of dollars stolen, lives destroyed across 3 countries. Craig and his partner had been running their operation for years, always staying one step ahead of the law. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd kept records of everything. Insurance, Craig said when he saw what I was looking at. You never know when you might need leverage. Against who? Partners, clients, law enforcement. You'd be surprised how many people can be bought if you know their secrets. I found a file labeled Seattle and opened it. Inside were photos, financial records, and detailed plans for the con they'd run on Julia. But there was something else. Surveillance photos of me, Chloe, even Mike Duvall. You were watching all of us. Of course, know your enemies, anticipate their moves. You made it easy, though. So predictable, so righteously angry. I knew exactly how you'd react to every move we made. Except for this one. His smile faded. This doesn't change anything. You can't prove I stole that money. It's all in offshore accounts under false names. By the time your FBI friends sort through the paperwork, I'll be long gone. I don't think so. I pulled out my phone and dialed Mike Duvall's number. It was early morning in Seattle, but he answered on the second ring. Rick, where the hell are you? Grand Cayman, and I've got some presents for you. I spent the next 20 minutes explaining the situation while Craig and his partner sat tied up on the floor, glaring at me with impotent rage. Mike promised to contact the FBI and the Cayman Islands police, and to coordinate Julia's return to the island to identify the suspects and recover her money. When I hung up, Craig was still smiling. You think you've won, he said. But this is just the beginning. I've got friends, Rick. People who don't like it when their business partners disappear. Then they can visit you in prison. Prison, he laughed. You really think it's going to be that simple? I've got enough dirt on enough important people to walk away from this. Hell, I'll probably be back in business within a year. Maybe, but you'll never touch my family again. Your family? His laugh was ugly now, full of malice. Rick, your family is already destroyed. Julia will never trust anyone again after what Brandon did to her. Melissa's reputation is ruined. Nobody in Seattle society will have anything to do with her. And you're still the same washed-up ex-cop you were when this started. He was trying to get under my skin, to make me angry enough to do something stupid. But I'd heard it all before from better men than him. You're right, I said. I am the same man I was when this started. And that's exactly why you lost. The police arrived an hour later, local cops, FBI agents, and what looked like half the Cayman Islands Financial Crimes Unit. Craig and his partner were taken into custody, along with the laptop and documents I'd recovered from the safe. Brandon was also arrested, but I had a feeling he'd end up with a lighter sentence in exchange for his cooperation. He'd made bad choices, but he wasn't a butcher like Craig. As for the money, the FBI agent in charge told me it would take time to sort through all the offshore accounts and shell companies, but they were optimistic about recovering most of Julia's trust fund. "What about the other sufferers?" I asked. "We'll do our best," she said. "But some of that money's been gone for years. It might be impossible to trace." I understood. Justice was rarely perfect, and sufferers didn't always get made whole. But at least Craig and his partner would never hurt anyone else. 3 days later, Julia flew down to Grand Cayman to give her statement and formally identify the suspects. She looked better than she had in weeks, still hurt, still angry, but no longer broken. "I can't believe I fell for it," she said as we walked along 7 Mile Beach. "All those months thinking Brandon loved me, planning our future together. How could I have been so stupid?" "You weren't stupid. You were trusting. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because right now it feels like the same thing." I stopped walking and turned to face her. "Julia, listen to me. What happened to you wasn't your fault. Craig and Brandon are professional criminals who've been doing this for years. They're experts at manipulating people, at finding their weaknesses and exploiting them." "But I should have seen the signs." "What signs? That your fiancé was charming and successful? That he seemed to love you? Those aren't warning signs, sweetheart. Those are the things you should expect from someone who wants to marry you." She was quiet for a moment, watching the waves roll onto the beach. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust anyone again." "You will. It'll take time, but you will. And when you do, you'll be stronger and wiser for having gone through this." "How can you be so sure?" "Because you're my daughter, and Lawsons don't stay down." She smiled for the first time since this whole nightmare began. "Is that our family motto?" "It is now." We flew back to Seattle together the next day. Melissa was waiting at the airport, looking older and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. The scandal had hit her hard. Her social circle had abandoned her. Her reputation was in ruins, and she was facing potential criminal charges as an accessory to Craig's crimes. "Julia," she said, reaching for our daughter with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea what Craig was really doing." Julia hugged her mother, but I could see the distance in her eyes. It would take time for them to rebuild their relationship, if they ever could. "What happens now?" Melissa asked me. "Now you get a good lawyer and hope the FBI believes you were as much a sufferer as anyone else." "And us? Our family?" I looked at Julia, who was watching me with curious eyes. "We're not a family anymore, Melissa. We haven't been for a long time. But Julia is my daughter, and I'll always be there for her." Melissa nodded, understanding. "I know, and I'm grateful for that." 6 months later, Craig was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. His partner got 15 years. Brandon received 5 years and agreed to testify against Craig in exchange for the reduced sentence. Julia got most of her money back, though the legal fees ate up a significant chunk of it. She used what was left to go back to school, pursuing a master's degree in social work. She said she wanted to help other people who'd been victimized by criminals like Craig. As for me, I went back to my little office above the Chinese restaurant, taking the cases that came my way and trying to make a difference one client at a time. The experience with Craig had reminded me why I'd become a cop in the first place, not for the glory or the excitement, but because someone had to stand between the predators and their sufferers. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very determined, you could make sure the predators lost. Julia stopped by the office one afternoon, bringing coffee and updates on her classes. She looked good, healthy, confident, ready to take on the world again. "Any regrets?" she asked as we sat in my cramped office, watching the Seattle traffic crawl by outside. "About what? About going after Craig? About risking everything to get my money back?" I thought about it for a moment. "No regrets. You're my daughter, Julia. I'd do it again in a heartbeat." She smiled. "Good, because I'd expect nothing less from my father." As she left, I realized Craig had been wrong about one thing. My family wasn't destroyed. It was different now, smaller maybe, but stronger than it had ever been. And that was worth more than all the money in the Cayman Islands.